Did you ever try to my MC for about 9 years, yeah.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Magers Quinn. My name is Sarah, and I am one of the booksellers here. I am so pleased that you're joining us to celebrate Patrick Strait's new book, Home Club. A few housekeeping things before we get on with the show. Tonight you will hear from Patrick in conversation with Louis Lee. Then there will be time at the end of the program for audience questions if you have any. After Q&A, please allow the author to move to the signing counter, which is the glass display case you pass on your way into the store. You may line up there to say hello and get a signed copy of the book tonight. If you do buy a book here this evening, you're not only supporting our author, but a locally owned independent bookstore, and we cannot thank you enough. Thank you very much. Finally, please allow me to introduce our guests. Patrick Strait has been a comedy beat reporter for City Pages, The Growler, and Thrillist. He is the author of Funny Thing About Minnesota, The Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of the Twin Cities Comedy Scene. He lives in Minneapolis. Louis Lee was a young man looking for home after immigrating to America from Hong Kong in the late 1970s. For Lee, that home would come in the form of Acme Comedy Company, one of the most highly respected comedy clubs anywhere in the world for over 30 years. Lee has strived to provide a creative haven for comedians while working tirelessly to impact the art of stand-up comedy in Minnesota and beyond. An innovator, disruptor, dreamer, and freethinker, Lee has played a role in comics like Nick Swartzen, Chad Daniels, Maria Bamford, and more getting their start and finding their path to comedy stardom. Please join me in welcoming Patrick and Louis.
Thank you for joining us, sir. Yes, thank you everybody for joining us. We're on Louis Lee cocktail time tonight, so that's what time we're starting this program at. How are you doing?
Good.
Good. Thank you again for doing this, sir. Thank you all for coming here tonight. I really appreciate it. Just so there's no confusion, I'm Patrick Strait. I'm the author of the book, and the gentleman to my left is Louis Lee, who is the owner, the proprietor, the kingpin of Acme Comedy Company. In my opinion, the most important comedy club, really in my opinion, in the United States, but definitely in the state of Minnesota. Louis, you love being in front of the people, so I mean, don't worry, we're going to get plenty of time to chat. But the great thing tonight, which we haven't done before, is we are actually going to take questions tonight. If there's one thing Louis loves more than performing in front of people, it's answering questions with no preparation. So, think of your wildest questions. His daughter is here tonight, so feel free to ask your dad anything that you really want to ask him tonight. He's never been willing to share with you. And we'll have some fun. So, well, let's jump into it, shall we?
Sure.
All right, so real quick, let's kind of get a feel for the crowd here before I start. How many folks here have been to a show at Acme Comedy Company at some point in their life? Okay. How many people have never been to a show at Acme before? Okay, so we have some folks who've never been before. You're just ride or die for books. I love it. So, for those who aren't aware, I'll give a little bit of background on the club and on Louis, and then we're going to get into it here. Acme Comedy Company has been around for almost 34 years. It started in November of 1991, and it's still in the same location down in the Warehouse District here in Minneapolis. And really, when Acme started in 91, I mean, for those of us like myself who, FYI, I was 9 because I'm very young and cool. For those of us who weren't there, stand-up comedy in 1991 was not what it is today. It was not cool. It was not popular. It was not something that was really big and mainstream. In fact, it was kind of in a period where comedy had kind of burst. Like, it had a really, really, really high point in the late 80s into the early 90s, and then it kind of popped. And so, what better time to start a stand-up comedy club than right at the plummeting point of comedy. So first and foremost, kudos to you on your keen business sense, sir. But before we talk about Acme, I want to talk about you, and I want to give some background about you, and I want to chat a little bit about how you came to America first and foremost. So, for those who aren't aware, Louis is originally from Hong Kong. You moved here in '77, if I'm not mistaken, is that right?
Yep.
And you didn't come alone, though. You're one of 8 siblings. How many of your siblings came here in '77, and how did you actually end up deciding to come to America in the first place?
It was 5 of us. And I have an older brother and older sister already here going to college at that time. So they're the one that said, well, Minnesota is the place. And that's why we came here, because if you go to East Coast and West Coast in the late 70s, it's kind of rough to the Asians.
Sure.
So we decided to go to Minnesota. Not too many Asians here. So to them, they call it less distraction.
Okay, interesting.
So we're here because we have relatives in West Coast. And when we landed, they were trying to get us, hey, stay in the West Coast because there's so much going on, which means you can work in the West Coast in the restaurant business. And my brother and sister who were here at that time said, no, you don't need any distraction, you just want to go to school, so you come up here. That's how we ended up here.
Sure. And now, how many siblings total were here?
Well, including
Including the ones that were here before you moved here.
it was 7 of us.
Okay, so almost the whole crew was here.
Yep.
And so before, I mean, obviously your older siblings who are already going to school here, they had made a decision, but did your parents include you? I mean, how did the conversation happen with your parents to say, hey, you're moving to the US, you're moving to Minnesota? I mean, is this a conversation that you were brought into the mix on? Is this something that was kind of explained to you that you were going? How did that come to be?
Okay, in those days, going to school here is very expensive. So they would try to send one first and then the other. And then my mother's sister, who happened to marry an American at that time, and said, hey, you can come here to be an immigrant, and all your kids under 18 will be immigrant too. So might as well do that. And that's how we ended up here. Because, kids under 18 with the parent, we can come here, and of course, those days we have a lot of rules that you cannot cross before you are even qualified to enter this country.
Now, like it is now, doors are open, just come on in. That's the immigrant way today, but yes.
Yeah, seriously, they have background check. I was told in Hong Kong in those days, because Hong Kong right next to communist China, if you want to go to U.S., you cannot go to China-owned stores. Otherwise, they treat you like a spy, so you won't be able to get
Like
in.
Chinese-owned stores in America?
In Hong Kong.
In Hong Kong, got it,
Yeah.
okay.
So there are a lot of things that they really stated in order to get to U.S. and you want to become resident, not even a citizen, you have to live by the rules. So it's a small price to pay.
Sure.
So those were the days that we all understand they are going to check you out, no matter what. I mean, including before you go to U.S. They're going to make sure that you do the right thing, because those are the days in the 70s, everybody's afraid of communism.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So those are the things that, and I'm sure most of you guys don't pay any attention today. Those were the days that in order to even come to U.S., you have to live by the rules. And then, of course, after we come here, everything changed, and then your experience totally different. Now that's in the 70s. And those were the days that we thought we are going to the next stage. And then later on, 20 years later, in the 90s, I find out, no, we're going backwards.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Interesting. So, one thing that I think is interesting that you told me about, and we've talked about it in the book, but we've talked about it even more, is I know you said that there weren't as many Asians maybe in Minnesota, or there wasn't as dense of a population, but there was a population of folks from Hong Kong in Minnesota. I mean, when you and your siblings first moved here, you said there was a community of people or there was a community of people from Hong Kong. Is that right?
Yep. At the University of Minnesota, probably around 30 or 40.
Okay.
So,
And I know one thing you mentioned is your siblings, you know, they quickly kind of became part of that community, right? I mean, they hung out with these people. You, on the other hand, a little bit different path. Maybe tell me a little about why that came to be.
okay. When I get here, the first thing, of course, is to find a job, because I was here early August. School doesn't start those days until late September. So you got 6 weeks to work a lot of hours. So I went, apply a job, and then I have to wait for 4 days to get an answer whether I can get an interview.
Oh, sure.
So those days, every weekend is the Hong Kong students and the University of Minnesota will get together. And from day one on, I have to skip it. And after that, I started work in a hotel, which means you work every weekend. Which means every weekend, the Hong Kong students get together, I have to skip, because I have to work,
Sure.
so.
Let that be a lesson to you. Skip work. Bond with your friends. Don't reach for the stars. No, I think that's interesting. One thing that I really, I didn't intend for this when we started working on this book together. One thing that I think became a really prevalent theme was kind of that need to find a community and kind of find that group of people who you kind of felt like you identified with. And I think from the beginning, to hear you say it, you kind of had a little bit of that kind of outsider feeling, that little bit of outsider tendency. You're in a country where you don't speak the language. The folks who are from the same country as you, like you said, they're kind of on a different path. So, do you feel right away kind of like, okay, I don't know where I fit in here, or kind of what's your feeling as far as, I moved from Michigan and I felt weird when I moved here. So, what's it like trying to establish yourself in a new country, not speaking the language, and really just not having that community around you?
Number one, you feel dumb right away, because people are talking and then you don't understand what they're saying about you. So all I did was, okay, I'm here to do my job, and that's all I'm going to do. And of course, 3 weeks later, I was almost fired. And then one of my managers decided to step up and said, give him a second chance, which I learned a lot from that later on in life. But when I was fired, that afternoon, I thought everything in the end, because I'm here. If I don't have a job, I can't pay for my school. I cannot pay, my sibling that we all live together to fulfill my monthly responsibility. So, and then a few hours later, the night manager came in. He said, hey, I'm gonna give this guy a chance. So that was the turning point that I learned a lot, because I was not being able to speak the language. I did something terrible, according to my manager, the day supervisor at that time, because I took a reservation and spelled the last name wrong. In a restaurant that is hey, they have a lot of important guests, and they have to turn away an important person. So I was slapping back in my head and called me name and you're fired. Now that's only 77, so it's not a big deal those days. And I totally understand that. But the night manager came in and said, no, I'm gonna give this kid one more chance. And so that's what happened.
Sure. And real quick to go to the audience, because there are some folks here who have worked at Acme and worked with Lewis before. How many times would you say you got slapped in the back of the head over the course of your time with Lewis? Feel free to shout it out. Several, yes. But did he always then give you another chance, is his real question. No, well, that's interesting. That's something we're going to come back to is the idea of second chances. I do want to talk a little bit more about that here tonight. But first, let's jump into the comedy, right? I mean, we've learned about Lewis, but obviously Acme Comedy Company and just the comedy history that comes with it is really what kind of brought a lot of us here. So I want to talk about when you did find that community, and you found that community first through stand-up comedy. So I'm going to try to read a little bit tonight. I wrote this whole book, so I'm reading it for the first time too. It's cool. It's interesting stuff. So the one thing that I thought was an interesting quote was, you had a girlfriend who at the time brought you to your first comedy show, which was the Minneapolis Comedy All-Stars. That was Louis Anderson and Alex Cole and Jeff Cesario and Joel Madison. And your comment, your quote here, and I want this on the record for all comics to hear and remember. I would only get half the show, but the crowd was so good that I'd be like, wow, this is how people communicate with each other. It was different from my textbooks, different than movies. Movies were scripted. Here they just talked naturally. And then you go on to say, and the camera's right there, I want to make sure the camera's looking at me when I say this. To me, I was thinking, this is how I can learn more English, and I can be funny when I talk to other people by stealing jokes from the comics. Louis Lee, on the record, noted joke thief. But no, I mean, I do think it's interesting because, I mean, as you say in the book, though, you didn't speak the language. And comedy at that time was a really kind of newer phenomenon. When you go in there, and you and I have talked about this, I mean, obviously the art form, the material, that's interesting, but you said kind of the crowd is really what kind of drew you in, right? I mean, what was it like when you first started going to comedy shows here back in the early 80s?
Oh yeah, it's totally different.
Different how, though?
Okay, in 81, people are, I have to say, when they walk into the show, they did not expect what they're going to see. And when they see it, they have the natural response.
Because there's no television, there's no YouTube, there's not, stand-up comedy's not saturated the same way, sure.
I'm kind of one of them.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Except I don't speak the language.
Sure.
And what happened is, I look around, people look at the performer, and then we all have, not, kind of have to be, just have the same response. And then I was sitting there, I was looking around and said, I'm missing a lot. Because I don't understand some of the stuff they say.
Mm-hmm.
So, back in my mind at that point is that it's something around about this thing. I have to find out more.
Sure, absolutely. And you did find out more. You went to a lot of stand-up comedy, and I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. You can read more in the book, Home Club available now at the front. You would ultimately get involved kind of on, not fully the promotion side, but you partner with somebody who was a major figure in stand-up comedy here locally. You guys would go into business together. That wouldn't go so well. And then ultimately, here come the early 90s. Like I said, we've gotten to a point where, I believe actually, and I wish I would have bookmarked it here, I believe you said after the fallout with Scott Hansen that you wanted to stay as far away from stand-up comedy as possible. And that was kind of your attitude right before you opened what is now one of the longest-standing comedy clubs in the country. That's about accurate though, right?
Right.
Sure. Right. So let's jump ahead to that. So 1991 comes around. Louis Lee and a partner have decided we want to open a bar. We want to open a restaurant, and lo and behold, serendipitously, there's this comedy club space that just cannot keep a tenant in the warehouse district. They get it for pennies on the dollar. It's very interesting how it kind of all comes together. And now, against your better judgment, against your wishes, you now own a comedy club. But you still are very much of the attitude, I believe the quote in here is, you wanted to be involved with the restaurant side, because you're a restaurant man by trade. I mean, that's what you are from day one. And you wanted to stay away from the club side. I mean, is that kind of the attitude you had going into Acme?
Oh yeah.
And what was it specifically that you wanted to stay away from on the comedy side? I mean, was it the personalities? Was it just the hangover of the poor business that you dealt with before with Scott Hansen? What was it?
Well, it was like, I make a lot of good friends with comics.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I started to realize it's a different world.
Mm-hmm.
The comics involved with totally different world because they all have a different path they want to go. And I have my own path is completely different. I've been friends with a lot of them for years. And at the same time, I feel like we're going a different route. All I want at that point was paying back my family that I owe them, and then move on. And meanwhile, they are going to explore what's coming next.
Sure.
Because in the early 90s, some of the local comics, you read his first book. That
Also available here, Magers Quinn. Anyways.
they moved to LA, and because of the relationship between Louis Anderson and Roseanne and a couple other people, a lot of locals move out west, connect with those connections, and then they move on to the next step. Okay, in that world is who you know. In my world is, are you gonna find out how you're gonna put enough money to open the next day? So they're looking at what's further out. I'm looking at what's going on tomorrow, or even today sometimes. So we're different, but we're good friends. So we just like, we are in a different path. Because comics always look about, if I make this move, who am I gonna meet? Where am I gonna go next step? And in my business is like, do you have enough money in the bank to cover the payroll?
Interesting. This is the first time we've ever talked about this, by the way. I'm just as captivated here. So, I mean, and we'll touch on kind of how that's evolved over time, but I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, comedy by nature is very much it's a transient business. I mean, there's people who go work at a company for 20 years. If you're a comic, most likely you don't want to stay in the same club for 20 years. I mean, you've got bigger goals. But you as a businessman, you still have to look at, like you said, that longevity. That's really interesting.
Right. I mean, if you're a comic, you're based on your talent and what's going on around you that you try to avoid. That's why comic hire a business manager, agent, to take care of the pain in the butt thing. In our business, you try to figure out, are you gonna have electricity, gas today? Is your liquor company, your food company gonna deliver? So those are the immediate thing you have to figure out a way to solve the problem. And on the other end, they look at it as, am I supposed to go this party so that I may meet somebody who's important? So, I mean, it's different. Doesn't mean my world and the world are completely who is more important, and we're the same. We're just still trying to look to stay afloat in our business. The art form of itself is, they're a lot more creative than me. They can do something I cannot do. So in my world, I have to look at the reality. In their world, they have to look at the 80s or even the 90s. Is who do I know to get me to the next step? Consider if all the talent are the same, which at the same time is not true either. So that's another chapter.
Sure. No, and I mean, that's interesting too, because like you said, I mean, they're looking at, I mean, it sounds very ladder climbing to say it this way, but they're looking for the potential of where can this club get me? Where can this relationship get me? And like you said, you're trying to keep a successful business running. And that's why I think it's interesting, because, as we said, you wanted to stay away from the business because, again, it was, hey, there is way too many relationships, way too many personalities. So instead you hired somebody who did the early booking. She was filling the calendar, she was hiring the comics. But something you said was interesting to me. Because keep in mind, this is 91, maybe early 92. And at this point, the person who is booking the club has kind of gotten to a point where she says, hey, she actually says, I didn't have the money to hire enough comics to come work. So a lot of the comics, plus a lot of the comics at this point too, are working at the competing clubs over at Scott Hansen's, which you two have had a falling out, you don't have a good relationship, so she's not able to book those folks. And so she says, as a solution, I know, I'm going to book myself to headline a few weeks out of the month. We'll bring a few people in here who, are regulars, and they'll headline the other spots. And this is where I think it's interesting, because keep in mind, you are not really involved in the comedy side, but you say to her, no, that's not the way I want to start a comedy club. You have to do something different. She didn't agree, so I looked at her and said, then you gotta go. So this is what's interesting to me, because at this point, you still are very much of the attitude that, hey, I'm a bar guy, I'm a restaurant guy, I don't want to be in the comedy side. But you saw very early on that there was a right and a wrong way. And was that based on just what you'd seen from a business standpoint, or is there a creative motivation there too, where you're like, no, that's not what this club is going to be. This is going to have more of a creative hub.
Well, okay, in the late 80s, early 90s, people look at stand-up comedy in a way that they look at a short 4 to 7 minute set in Tonight Show or any cable show. And as far as I know, stand-up comedy is a hell of a lot more than that. And then those are the days, and when you hire comics, you look at what kind of credit they have, how many times they have on Tonight Show or the Letterman or any of the cable show. If you don't have that credit, you're worth a lot less. At the same time, the way I look at it is that those days it's going to be over, because you have a percentage of comics who make a living, not a good one, out of how many times they go on the Tonight Show. And then the people who lucky enough to get a sitcom, they make a lot of money. And they don't need to go on the road. And then you have 99% of the rest. And the way I look at it is, this is not gonna last. And when somebody tell me that, well, this is the way you're gonna go with the credit, you can't afford the credit those days, well, we're gonna have to get a couple of friends together and put up a show. Which I thought, no, you gotta be creative and start something new in the business.
Interesting. No, and I mean, I think, obviously, I wasn't there, but from what I can gather from that period, I mean, it's still kind of continued to be a recurring trend in comedy over years, where you can bring in, you can open up the wallet and you can bring in whatever the hot thing is. I mean, now it's TikTok comics. Back then it was, like you said, who had the 4 minutes on Johnny Carson. It's whatever the case was. But like you said, if those options aren't available to you, I mean, our friend Nick Swartzen, I believe, told me when he first came into comedy that when he first tried stand-up comedy, he goes, it was bad guys wearing piano ties, is what he actually said it was. So needless to say, there was definitely a stink and a stigma on what the other side, not the Tonight Show comics, but what we'll say the B-room type comics looked like.
Right. And those were the days that I don't think people understand what comedy was to become a comic. That's one thing, you go to a comedy show and looking at the performer, and then you say, well, I can do that too. Which a lot of people at that days believed that. At the same time, I am on the other side of the spectrum, is that we're draining the talent. Because those were the days that a lot of people just open the rooms. In the back of the bar, you're gonna have a club, and you're gonna put a microphone out, and you're gonna charge people so that you can sell your drinks. And I can see is walking toward the end. And in 1991, when Acme will open, we have 275 seats. But every weekend in the Metro, Minneapolis, and St. Paul, add up, we have almost 5,000 seats we need to sell, because we have 6 clubs. So you have 2 on Friday, 2 on Saturday, sometimes 3. You add all these seats together. You have to fill the theater twice in one night over the weekend. And then you're charging a lot of money. and everybody said, well, what happened? The same thing now is everybody chase after what make money today. Doesn't understand that there's too many people going to the same thing. I'm gonna open the business, I'm gonna make money today. Meanwhile, in comedy, we're the comics. You don't go a comic one day. And I started to understand that because I make friends with comic all those years. And I know a lot of them, most of them don't make it, still my friends, but at the same time, I can see it's not any difference than professional sports. Not everybody make it. And those are the days I started to understand that we have to start to look to build a new way to grow new comics. At the same time, we gotta find a new audience that don't look at credits. They start to appreciate comedy a lot more. So you have to go both ways. You grow your audience, you grow your talent. That back of my mind, of course, that's only 30%. The other 70% how I'm gonna keep the lights up.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because, like you said, I mean, the way that you build that audience as well as that kind of base of comics is you looked to kind of almost move the goalpost backwards in terms of age. So you started saying, let's figure out how we pull in a younger audience. So that's why Acme became 18 plus for its open mic night. So the kids could come who couldn't drink, but they could still see what live comedy looked like. You had, obviously, the open mic from a performer standpoint brought in some new faces. You had the contest, which is still going on now, 30 plus years later, where people were invited to come out and try their best 3 minutes for the opportunity to win $1,000 and, you know, the prestige of being the funniest person in Minneapolis. And what I want to do is, and we didn't get the chance to do this at our last event, I'm excited to do it here, I want to talk about a couple of those folks, because really I think some of the people who started to kind of rise to the occasion and became those big names, I think it's kind of interesting the role that you played and the role that the club played. So let's jump into that here. The first, I mentioned it before, of course, is our friend Nick Swartzen. If you haven't heard of him, he's on Netflix everywhere. Just Google him, it's fine. But Nick, I would say, and I mean, there were others before Nick. I mean, there's a man named Dave Mordahl, who I think is incredible. A lot of comics who came about in that 90s period. But to me, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, I think Nick Swartzen was really probably the first, for lack of a better term, homegrown Acme comic that really kind of, I think the term used was popped. And I know when he came in the early to mid-90s, you know, he was somebody who was 19 years old, he's not old enough to drink, and he was one that kind of caught fire as far as the younger audience started to kind of, they found him, they started to think, okay, this is cool, I want to see this. So what was it like? I mean, Nick obviously is a part of that, but for you, when you start seeing that younger audience showing up to perform, to be a part of the crowd, I mean, are you thinking, yeah, this is what I thought was going to happen, and I'm right about this? Or do you kind of see that trend and you embrace it and you kind of keep running with it?
Okay, when things happen, you don't realize that, you know, every Monday you see the crowd size, that was our open mic. From the original get-go, you get 20, 30 people, and then go to 40, go to 50, go to 75. You don't realize it's growing slowly. Every Monday you walk in, you said, when is gonna be ever this room is gonna fill on a Monday night? And it did come across, but at the same time, to me, the audience grows so slow, I don't realize, but at the same time, I look at the talent that go on stage. That trying is getting a little younger, which means something is happening. You know, Nick was right when he first started. You got a bunch of middle-aged people that say, "Hey, I'm sick and tired of my lifestyle. I want to try something new."
Like write a book about comedy.
And then now you get the young kids who can go to a club that you don't need to be 21, and then you sit there and have the same attitude, I can do that. But when you're 19 or 20, you tend to like say, well, I'm gonna give it a try, I'm gonna give it a try. Versus that, I'm so sick and tired with my life, I'm gonna make a change. So those are two different attitudes. And the attitude itself, I'm not taking away the people who are older and try to change their life. Well, I'm one of them. On the other hand, you got a young kid think that they're bulletproof. I have nothing to lose. I'm gonna try something nobody else I see up there try. Then you see the big fruit. When Nick Swartzen come up, he was so high energy on stage. To begin with, I cannot even hear what he said. You see a kid jumping around. And later on in life, if you see Nick Swartzen act later on, it's so calm. You just stand there and tell jokes. And that's when you see a kid become a man at that point. Or you see the maturity of an artist. And that, therefore, the way I look at it is, Nick is just one. There are plenty of other comics throughout the years, including today, that I have to have open mind to look at them and say, maybe there's something about them they see I don't see. And I have to give them a chance so that they can find out where they can go. That's my, that's pretty much, by the way, the only reason why Acme is still open.
Well, one thing I want to point out, because I do think it's important, Nick obviously would go on to do incredible things, movies and specials, and Acme is still a place, though, that he always comes back to. And the reason he comes back to it, from what he told me, is specifically you, but also just the way that you understood comedy early on. And I want to read this because I think it speaks a lot to this. Nick, once again, as you'll read in the book, Nick became, as the term Lewis termed, he popped really early. He got discovered. He went out to Aspen for the Aspen Comedy Festival, and this is when the industry was like, oh, this is going to be the guy. Like, this is going to be the kid. And everybody wanted to get a hold of him. And he was freaked out, and he was nervous, and he came to talk to Lewis, and he said that, Lewis told me to just go out there, don't overthink it, and just do my thing. He goes, I felt way more pressure when I go to Aspen because everyone's like, do you want a sitcom? Do you have ideas? Do you want to do this or that? But with Lewis, he's a pure stand-up connoisseur. He knows stand-up so well, he's just brilliant. He gets it, and he knows who's good at it, and doesn't put pressure back on the comics. He says that's why he's never filtered anybody at his club. So, really impressive words. Big words coming from somebody who has achieved so much. But I think that does speak to it. And you mentioned even now, right, that there will be comics that you'll see them and you say, okay, I need to give them a chance where maybe there's something I don't see, or maybe the audience sees something that's different or unique. And that's something you've really carried with you from the beginning, right?
Right.
And I'm curious, I don't want to draw the line myself, but do you feel like maybe that reflects you as a person just a little bit? You see people who, they're going their own way, they're blazing their own trail, they aren't necessarily following the same path. Did you feel like, obviously you weren't going to get up there and do comedy, but do you feel like you had some of that spirit yourself as you're going through and you're getting more involved in this art form?
I try not to. Seriously, I tried the number one thing all these years, I try to tell myself is, my path is different than anybody else's. And I don't use my path to judge and think about other people. That's how they should live their life. Just because my life is different, theirs shouldn't be the same. But because I work my way through to the point that I never dreamed of, that also means that the more I know about my life path, the more I don't want to tell other people how to live their life. So, because in my life, most of the time, everybody tell me how I should live. And at the same time, the last thing I want to tell anybody, this is the path they should follow. So, I try to go through that in life, and of course, because stand-up comedy is an art form, and a lot of the comics are artists. They treat it as an art form. And the more you put a path to them, which means you're drawing a line that, okay, in order to tell a good joke, these are the steps you have to go through. That's absolutely bullshit. You cannot teach how to write a joke and how to present a joke. You have to make them understand who they are, and then they write a joke the way they see fits. My job is see whether they can write a job. They can write a joke or not. That's me. I'm not the one that's, here's the way you're gonna write a joke, which is the same way your question is, how you live your life, where's your path? The more I'm gonna set up the path for everybody, including my daughter sitting right there, that she's gonna come back to me in 10 years that, Dad, you told me, here's the way, and I can go to the next step. I don't want to do that. You know, you fail. I can teach you how to stand back up. But I cannot teach you how to go to the next step. So to me, looking at stand-up comedy is sometimes a comic don't get booked back. It's not because they think they do something wrong with the politics, who they know. It is, to me, is like, okay, there's something you're missing. But I'm not in a position to tell you what you're missing because you are the artist, I'm not. What I'm trying to do is, if you understand how this club works, you figure out yourself. So.
Yeah. And we will be asking your daughter all about what your life advice to her has been. And we will be doing a follow-up conversation called Lewis Was Wrong about all of that advice later on. You know, one thing you did talk about, though, and I wanna touch on another person here in a second, is that, you know, you supported folks who were following their own path, who they said, okay, I think I see how I want to get to this next level. And you didn't always necessarily see it, but you at least wanted to provide them the support and the opportunity. And another person who I want to talk about, who we discuss in this book quite a bit, is of course Mitch Hedberg, who's somebody who didn't necessarily, I wouldn't say he was an Acme comic and that he didn't start at Acme, but he did come through Acme quite a bit. I mean, he's obviously from St. Paul, he played an important role here. I know Jen over here, this is Jen Bryce, everybody, by the way, who played a huge role in keeping Acme running for many, many years. And I know Jen was responsible for bringing him in a lot, and I think both of you said to me in this book that when you first saw Mitch Hedberg, and when he first went up, people hated Mitch Hedberg. Mm-hmm. And from a business standpoint, I mean, I would think, okay, I own a comedy club. People hate this guy. I don't want to have him back. Both of you took a different attitude, and you said, this is somebody who we want to provide that space to. And I want to know, not necessarily just in the case of Mitch, but I think he's a good example. You know, when you did see somebody who had something unique or something different, and they were willing to explore it, even if it wasn't a smash hit from a business standpoint right away. I mean, how hard was that for you to say, I'm going to stay the course, as opposed to saying, like, I don't know if this is right for me from a business standpoint right now?
Okay. The theory in the early 90s, when Acme tried to survive the next day, the next week, is you figure a way how to rewrite the comedy business. And in the more you look at the late 80s, early 90s, is the formula of comedy. Everybody just look at certain things, okay, you gotta be like the Roseanne or the Seinfeld, or a couple other people. At the same time, when 90% of people who perform try to fit into that, Meanwhile, you have a few try to walk a different way. So at that point, it's not only looking at it as just an art, you're looking at it as it's like everybody's serving the same burger. Do you have a way to make it look a little bit different? You know, those are the days I remember, you know, I talked to Jen those days. Many times we have to find somebody different. And when somebody's different, doesn't mean they're popular. Most of the time when they start, they're not popular. Mitch Hedberg go on stage, he'll look at the floor, he doesn't look at anybody else's eyes, because he doesn't believe in himself. Not until later on when he started to believe more and more, he started to look up. But those are the things that you know, us, we cannot go to an artist and say, well, these are the things you have to do. Is you go up, you have to look at the eyes and look at what you say, are you connecting with them? We're not in the business to do that. We're in the business to let them grow. At the same time, are you willing to take a loss? At that time, sorry, in the early 90s, you have nothing to lose. If you lose what you have today, you might get twice as many people curious about who's up there. Are they going to come up something different? So, to us, we have to look at what you do today, willing to lose some of it, but at the same time getting curious of the people, say, hey, what's going to happen next? In the early 90s, that's what we have to look at. It's the people who lost faith in comedy at that point, and then started to say, well, this sucked. Is it? All I want is the people back of the mind is that it suck. I mean, to me, I didn't get it either. But to me, is that suck? I don't know. And that's all I need. So.
I feel like that should be over The Office in Acme. Does that suck? I don't know. So, you know, and another thing which I think is interesting, I want to point out here real quick is, you know, you were willing to push back, obviously, against, you know, kind of the norms of here's what mainstream entertainment thought this is what a comedian should be. You were willing to, in some cases, push back against even the audience, you know, where we just said, you know, they might hate somebody, but there might be more opportunity to bring in new audience because of it. There was even some instances where you were willing to kind of toe the line for the comics who were coming up locally, even against comics who maybe were a little bit more established. And one example I'm going to give is Elaine Thompson, who's over here. Oh yes, you didn't think I was going to not call you out, right? Come on. Elaine is actually the 2002 winner of the Funniest Person contest, so very special guest from us. Where'd you fly in from tonight? Texas?
Yes.
From Texas, all the way here. So everybody's like, oh, traffic was so bad, I'm sorry, Patrick, I didn't make it. Elaine came from Texas, so. But one interesting story that Elaine, you told me when we talked was, and I know, you know, when I look at you, the first thing I think of is extremely dirty, raw comic. That's the first thing I think of. And you guys laugh, but I'm right. I mean, you've told me that was kind of your comedy. And I believe you were opening for a gentleman named Emo Phillips, who, for those of you who don't know, Emo's a legend, but Emo is a very clean comedian. He's a very squeaky clean guy. And Elaine's story is, I'm telling your story like you're not sitting 8 feet from me. But Elaine told me that, you know, Emo came up to her before the show and said, okay, you know, I need you to go out there and do 10 clean minutes. And you said to him, I don't have 10 clean minutes. Which I believe we're going to do that full 10 minutes of just absolute filth after this, but that's neither here nor there. And, you know, Lewis, in this situation, this is where, you know, Emo Phillips is an established name. He's somebody who brings his own audience. He comes to you and he says, hey, you know, you got this opener for me and she can't do 10 clean minutes. And instead of saying, oops, sorry, Emo, we'll get somebody new in here, you pushed back and you said, she's going to be great. This is the right opener for you. Again, in those situations, I mean, is it back to is this a business decision or is it an art decision? I know I've asked that question a couple different ways tonight, But in this situation, I mean, I can't think of one way that you can. I know you're going to try to spin it because you're a businessman. I can't think of one way that you can't admit to me that you don't love the art form here. Because to me, that's an artist's decision. That you support the comic, you support what they want to say, even if a more established, more popular, more bankable comic is saying, nope, that's not what I want here.
When that happened, then it goes down to whether the club can stand on its own and talk to the headliner and say, okay, give that person a chance. 9 times out of 10, because they have so many bad experience, they'll just tell you pound sand. But fortunately, emo is such a gentleman for the most cases that if I sit down and go to emo, say, hey, come on. So being able to get the business to the point, or get the person to the point that have the, not the power, but the credit to sit down, to look into artists in their eyes, to say, give this person a chance. And the person would actually look at you and say, just like me, maybe something I don't know about. So, to me, getting the club to the point that be able to look at the artist and say, look, something is different about this person, give this person a chance. What's the difference between me understanding Rich Hepburn walk 70% of his audience when he was featuring, they go to the bar and wait until he's off stage and go back to watch a headliner. Same thing. So, you know, what it is you run a business and then you believe in what you do, your product, stand behind it. And then the next thing you know is you will create a demand. If you don't stand behind what you really believe in, forget it. Because what you're selling is something that no base. And exactly what happened in the comedy industry in the early 90s. So, you know, you look at it, it's a full circle. You know, last question about Mitch Hedberg, and then the next thing, same thing. Because you got somebody like Emo, who I absolutely adore as an artist. But he will come to me and then I can look him in the eyes that, look, somebody you don't know, give that person a chance. And then he will look back to me and say, okay. Because he knows that I'm not trying to sell something that I want to push. It's something that I believe. Which means whatever I do, the person who is performing along with Emo should mean as much. For Emo to open up his eyes to that, okay, it's not my style. It's not what I look at, but I should take a look. And I don't know how many times in my life I look at all the comics that perform, and then I look at myself and say, I don't get it. I still do. So, convince me. Because there are times that you have to look at it more than once. Now, when you get it, you find out that, Jesus Christ, this person's so good. That will take me more and more to understand what this person does. Then inspire me to learn more about the business or learn more about the art form. So, you know, to me, it's that simple. Don't judge.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, I think it's interesting when you said, you know, there were times where you saw a comic and you said, I don't get it, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's bad. So again, I'm really playing college professor here tonight with some of my parallels. To draw this line back though, do you feel like that ever kind of reflects how you and maybe your parents, your family's relationship was when you said, hey guys, I'm gonna get into stand-up comedy. I'm gonna open a comedy club. I'm gonna have all these degenerates in and out of here every single night. Do you think, and they supported you, I mean, and we talk about a lot in the book that they supported you through this. Do you think that their attitude was similar and that they said, maybe, I don't get it, but I believe it's worth trying and it was worth learning? And do you think maybe that's where some of that attitude came from you? Or am I giving your parents way too much credit? You know, like, no, they had no belief in me whatsoever.
No, actually, it's more than my parents, it's my sibling. You know, because when I fail huge. You know, it was terrible. But one thing in our culture is, if you know your sibling really mean to go for something, and then you kind of believe in that, even though they haven't proven to you yet. And what you do is that, okay, I'm gonna go in with you for a little bit, and then if it fail, are you gonna double down? And we Asian love to gamble. So I have to see that I think by the third time they kind of like, okay, we loan you money so that you can go through your summer, because summertime, June, July, August are the 3 months the club lose a lot of money, and then those are the days I go to my siblings that, can I have a bridge? At that time, what they do is they use the credit card credit to help fold the club. And then when the club started to do better in the fall, we pay them back so that they can pay off the credit card. You can only do it once or twice. But it was 92, 93, and by the time 94 comes around, it's getting tough. And then for them to say, okay, one more time, and not questioning me, and that I don't have to go to them and say, this is the last. I didn't tell them, but they kind of, at the point that it said, okay, this is it. I mean, if that's something that somebody have to look in the business, look at what I try to accomplish at that point, and then believe in it. I have one point I want to point out is, one time, I believe 92 or 93, you played the cash flow game so much that you write a check to a company to buy something, liquor, and then your check bounce. The liquor company will go to the state and say, hey, look, they bounce a check. So what they do is they ban you to buy liquor from everybody else. So if you want to do it, you have to break the law, you go to a liquor store to buy liquor. And then you try to sell those, and hopefully the state will come down and catch you. Now those are early 90s, don't do it these days. But those are the days that the way they figure it out is, there's certain business, it doesn't happen in food business, doesn't happen to any other business, but for the liquor business, you don't pay your bill, they get you. So, I remember to these days, what happened was the state issued us a 30 days. It's like, okay, in 30 days, you have to pay us, the state, every single penny you owe, which is sales tax at that point, which amounts to thousands of dollars. At that point, I cannot go to my brothers and say, can I borrow another 3,000? Because it's later in the summer, okay? And I run out of people to help me out. And I look at my partner those days that I guess we're done. Because we cannot get anything. And to these days, I remember that it was almost the end of acne at that point. And the only way to bail it out is somebody come out, use the credit, so I can get cash. They don't take, the state don't take credit card. You have to go in with cash to bail yourself out. And somehow we did it. But, you know, tonight, happy Jen is here. At that point, Jen go to her husband, use the credit card, drain the credit card. She was, you know, they were not rich. They only got a few $1,000s. They drain it so I can get the cash, right?
Do you remember being at the bank? Remember us laying all the money out and the people laughed, thinking maybe we were doing a drug deal? Like, no, we're getting a cashier's check made out to the state.
So, I mean, there are more than ones that we look at, just like you, about evil. You know, we all go to the end at a certain point in the 90s, the thing that our career is done because somebody don't like us. At the same time, the state said, you don't pay us up, you're done. Find a way to do it, that's all.
Sure. So what you're saying is the two takeaways I have from that is, number one, Wells Fargo really saved the day. Thank you again to Wells Fargo. And the second thing is we'll all be doing shots in Lewis's trunk after the show across the parking lot in the parking garage. So, well, hey, I want to make sure we save time for some questions here, but before we jump into that, I mean, let me just say this. I mean, I know I've kind of been beating people over the head with a little bit tonight, but truly I think that what I've taken away and what I hope that kind of comes across through this book is that you are somebody who has made it to the point where you are for both yourself, your family, and the comics and the people around you because you had a vision and you chose to stick to it. And it didn't always work out immediately. It wasn't always a quick win. It wasn't always a popular decision. But I mean, I think that, you know, it's one of those things where they say winners write history, right? And I mean, the fact that Acme Comedy Company is still here, is still thriving, 34 years later, I think proves that, you know, you were right. So I think that's the most important thing here is Lewis was right, and we thank you for being right and for sticking to your guns all these years. So thank you so much. All right. So I want to make sure we get a couple of minutes here. If anybody has any questions for Lewis or myself, we're a small enough crew. I don't think we need mics, but you know, let me know. Does anybody have a question? Otherwise, I have lots of questions for Lewis, but I'm going to throw it out to the audience and let you guys ask if there's anything that jumps out at you. You there, hand up in the back.
Hi. So there's a manager referenced in the book several times. Her name is Sarah Drew. Could you tell me when you first interviewed her, did you know how great she was going to be, or was she just dynamic? And can you just say 15 to 20 nice things about her? Just really simple, really fast, just list them. List them real quick. No, my real
He didn't even pick up his microphone. He was just stare. I love it.
My real question is, you have a great story about someone who helped you out in the early days, and they just made a documentary about him on HBO. Do you know who I'm talking about? Paul.
Huh?
Do you know who I'm talking about? You have a story.
Harvey Weinstein is his name.
Yes, Paul Rubens. Remember that story you told me? Him helping you one time?
Uh-huh.
Well, you should share that. I don't think it's in the book, but I've always liked that story.
Actually, I don't want to.
Well, now we need to hear the Pee-wee story. Come on now.
Okay. What's exactly the story you're talking about?
Whatever bullshit one you made up to me, you don't remember it? God damn it, this lies?
No.
No. Okay. Moving on, new question.
Jen, do you know the story?
I don't.
Okay. Did you make this story up when you were having drinks next door and making everybody wait 20 minutes before we started the program?
Okay. What exactly is the story about?
Someone had stolen a check and wiped out Acme, and you didn't have enough to pay a comedian.
Uh-huh. That one.
That one.
I was, I think the first year and a half we opened, our kitchen office, that's where our safe was, that's where you store your checkbook and everything. And somehow, we have a comic, come in that week, Stephanie Hodge, that's her name. So, that was the week that we started to have a lot of people come in because she was in the sitcom called Nurse.
Mm-hmm.
And because she was a good friend of the booker that came in, and then she hated the competitors. And she just said, well, I work at me. So she came in and worked for a very reasonable price at that time. And then, but when you said reasonable and she's on a sitcom, it's a lot of money to us. Because we don't, at that time, nobody paying for comedy at that time. And we were charging $10 a ticket. We need to sell 300 tickets just to pay her. And she actually got like 600 people paying for her over the weekend. And what happened was, one of our cooks decided to go, when we go in the kitchen office and forget to close the door, he went in, took a check out, and emptied the account. That was on a Friday when we find out, and that comic was working on a Saturday, work all the way through Saturday. And then between Friday and Saturday, we just have enough money to cover our pay. At the same time, there was the same weekend for payroll, which means on Monday, we have enough money to cover the comic, probably not enough to cover all the payroll. So that Saturday, me counting out all the money, I look at my partner at that time and said, look, we gotta rush in our bank and put every dollar in and then count every single drink to sell the weekend. Hopefully we can cover the payroll. So at the same time, at that time, the person who do the booking came to me and said, hey, look, Stephanie want to talk to you. And I said, hell, because at that time we agreed pay her enough money, but we never talk about air travel. At that time, she's in the position to ask for first class flight. So back of my mind was like, hey, we are gonna be in trouble because she's gonna ask for another $1,000 for first class flight. And I look at my partner and said, well, I gotta deal with it. We're gonna be short a couple $1,000 payroll. We better figure out something. And then when I get in there, Stephanie told the booker to walk away, so it was between myself and Stephanie. And she looked at me and she said, look, here's the money, $3,000 in cash, because at that time, we can't even write a check. We have to pay her cash. So she looked at me and she said, look, this $3,000 is what I deserve. This is what she said. And she, at that point, at one time, her and her husband, earlier, have a club called Our Club in Uptown. And they went through the same thing, cash poor and everything. And she told me the same thing, that last time that happened to her, a comic came in, sell the club out, but they still short. But the comic go to her, went to her and say, hey, look, I want you to have your club open. So the comic said, here's my pay, here's my down payment to keep your club open. That comic to her club, Pee Wee Herman. And then Stephanie looked at me and she said, I'm gonna carry that because the booker told me what happened to you. And she said, exactly the same word. I'd rather blow Satan than work for your competitor. So she came, she put the money in front of me and said, I don't want any of this. You just have to promise me one thing, keep the door open. So, those are the things that, because she didn't really want anybody to talk about that afterwards, because when you do something good, you just want to keep it to yourself, because she is that kind of person. But at this point, 30 some years later, she's still around, but to me, it's a person like that doing what she did, because how many of you think about Pee Wee Herman and what he did and what ended up in his career, but at the same time, the little story about that, what he did to a club in Minneapolis, uptown. Nobody knows. Do I want to talk about it? Not really.
Good question.
I mean, it's not because of that, it's because we all want to believe in what other people believe in. And the real truth of a lot of the things in our business is not about the greed, the glory, it's about the real person that we deal with every day. And it's still happening every day. Not to everybody, but I say 10 times out of 90. So, like I said, it looks a lot different from the outside. When you look at in Minneapolis, 34 years, a comedy club, well, they must be doing something right all the time. No, there's a lot of people doing little things along the way that keep the door open. Like I said, Jan did it, Stephanie did it, so it's not just me. I'm nobody. To begin with, it's without these little things, Acme does not exist. Because there are more than ones that's supposed to be done and still around. So.
Yeah, and if you ever want to, by the way, that was a Stephanie Hodge story. That wasn't a Pee Wee story, Sarah. That's why you got him confused.
I don't listen very carefully.
No, and also, two quick things as an add-on to that. Stephanie would actually then end up later on being cast in Pee Wee's Big Adventure. So if you go home tonight and watch Pee Wee's Big Adventure, she's the mermaid. So that connection obviously held up later. And if you really want to read somebody just goes scorched earth on another human being, I recommend my first book, Funny Thing About Minnesota, where Stephanie absolutely eviscerates Scott Hansen in one of the most entertaining but just soul-crushing diatribes I've ever been a part of, and I really highly recommend it. So we're gonna get out of here in a second, but last question.
Did you say hot club?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I bought your first book at the book festival a few years ago. I think the first time I was in Acme, I was bringing my kids to the Children's Museum, which was in that building. And I didn't remember 1991, but by the time my son was in junior high, he was interested in comedy, and I was bringing him to the Ha Ha Club because it was non-alcoholic. And I just, was there much connection between? I mean, they were there in the early 80s or before that. Did you have much connection with them?
Not really, because in the 80s, the Ha Ha Club, at that time was Stephanie and her husband at that time. You know, that have Ha Ha Club.
Yeah,
And it was direct competition with the Kingpin at that point. And I was working with Scott Hansen, the Kingpin.
oh, you,
company.
oh,
So at that time, you don't have to be separate.
yeah,
However, when Joe Hodgson started to bridge the gap, because he was doing a
Mystery
comedy
Science
education
Theater.
part, you know. So that's when it opened, that's when the Josh Weinstein and, you know, Phil Comic come from that and filled into Scott Hansen. Those are the early to mid 80s time. So, yeah, it was indirect, but at the same time, eventually, in our business, nobody can control everything. Nobody. So, you know, anybody think that they're big enough to control the whole market? No. You know who really run it? The comics. You don't have the comics, you don't have the product, you don't have a club.
Great question. I also did not know that the Children's Museum was in the building, and I love the idea that like Doug Stanhope and the Children's Museum are both happening in the same building simultaneously.
Oh,
I love
no,
that.
no, that was there I mean, at least the same building, maybe the same
Mhm.
spot, but then they moved and,
Wow. See, I'm learning things here tonight. We're all learning together.
that's why we're here.
This is great. No, thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. I mean, I know that Lewis, this is a huge. I mean, for me personally, this is a huge honor. This is a huge opportunity to get to talk to you, get to learn so much about this comedy business, to learn about Acme. And I mean, in all seriousness, you know, I've said this to you before. I mean, to have you trust me to write this story and to tell this story, which I think is truly one of the most fascinating stories in Minnesota. Not just in comedy, but I think as far as a Minnesota history story, I think this is so fascinating, has so many interesting elements, and I just want to say thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to tell it, and thank you all for reading it. And if you haven't read it, you can buy the book out in the lobby for our friends here at Magers Quinn. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lewis, for being here, and thank you guys all once again for reading. All right, well, I guess that means I'll see the cameras off, so now we can tell you guys the real stuff. Now,